We will be hearing from Mr. Colin Tite, Dr. Natalie Fong, and Dr. Lucky Law from the Center for Applied English Studies of the University of Hong Kong. And their topic will be an investigation of students' perceptions of learning transfer across 6 English in the disciplines courses for students of arts and humanities. Presenters, would you like to share your screen now? Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. Shall we start? All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. I'm Natalie Fong. My colleagues, Colin Tate and Dr. Lucky Law will be presenting a topic, an investigation of students' perceptions of learning transfer across 6 English in the discipline courses for students of arts and humanities in the University of Hong Kong. Lucky, yes, okay. All right, let's have a look at the presentation structure. I will talk more about the project background and the review of literature on the notion of learning transfer. And Colin, the program coordinator for Faculty of Arts in the University of Hong Kong, he will be introducing to all of you the courses that he has been coordinating. And he will also talk more about the methodology. And also, he will also talk about the findings and discussion. And Lockie will also talk through the implications and future action. And towards the end, we have the question and answer section. All right, let's talk about the introduction and the project background. All the courses in Hong Kong, you actually undergo revision annually during the summer months. And we have made a number of course changes and some improvements in order to meet students' needs and language demand. And although this developmental cycle has been a valuable process, and we have to meet the faculty needs. So therefore, we need to undertake 3 major tasks to analyze whether the learning outcomes of our courses are still well aligned to the faculty courses, and we'll also evaluate how students could successfully applying the skills learned in our courses into their practices and in other courses. And based on the findings from the analysis, we're going to revise the courses and develop new courses where necessary. So this is actually the background of this project of learning transferability. And in this project, we're going to investigate students' perceptions on the learned skills they find transferable in the CUE course, the English for General Academic Purposes course, and the English in the discipline courses and the extent of transferability. And in this presentation, we mainly focus on the English in the discipline courses for the Faculty of Arts. And based on the findings, we would like to identify the areas for improvement in the ED curriculum in order to improve the academic English literacy of Hong Kong U students. In terms of project deliverables, we would like to develop better teaching and learning materials of the education English in the discipline courses, and also to develop a framework for undergraduate course review so that we could prepare for an evaluation mechanism to evaluate the learning transfer in the main round of the study. Let me take you through to the some background of the literature on learning transfer. It's quite a new notion in the academic. All right, let's have a look at these 2 definitions. Right, the definition of learning transfer is fairly consistent across disciplines such as psychology, education, and human resources development, despite the differences in the objectives and purposes. And we could find similar definitions from different scholars. Learning transfer can occur in new situations or to address new challenges based on what we have experienced and learned. All right, Learning is actually a prerequisite of transfer. Without prior learning or experience, how can we transfer relevant skills to other contexts? When we teach something, we anticipate to some degree that students will make use of what they have learned or they have been taught. So students could apply the skills in the future class, to another course, or an area of life beyond school. Okay, transfer is therefore a higher level cognitive process than learning. So in order to help students to recognize the similarities and differences in an experimental pattern before they apply the skills into real context. And according to the literature, there are two types of transfer, near transfer and far transfer. The first one, near transfer, from the label, it takes place in situations which shows great similarities. Say, for example, students could apply the academic writing literacy skills they have learned from our EAP, ESP course to courses which require them to do academic writing in the discipline. So the writing contexts are very similar. Regarding far transfer, it could take place where situations are different. For example, how students refine the learned skills and apply them in out-of-class situations or in their future workplace or professional context. So how can we sustain transfer in an EAP instruction or classroom context? We may help students acquire reading, writing skill that they could apply or transfer to future source-based writing context beyond writing course. So actually it's based on the recommendation from Professor Alan Hirvela, who is very specialized in the research in the learning transferability. And also say, for example, students who may learn to synthesize in an EAP writing course and then want to do in, say, history course or another humanities course, and they must consider the disciplinary features that apply in the area. So potentially they could include different views on how to synthesize the ideas, right, into the writing context. Okay, now I'm going to pass the time to Colin, who is the program coordinator of the English in the Discipline courses for Faculty of Arts in the University of Hong Kong. He will be showing you more about the course background. Colin, please.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. Can you all hear me?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just want to check. Okay, so I just want to kind of give a kind of overview of how our courses fit into the wider Hong Kong U context and the arts faculty. So our courses are taken in the second or senior years. They're 6 credit courses, and each student must take the course in order to attain their degree. Now, a lot of the students haven't necessarily done the first year course, which is the core university English course. That's actually optional. So some of our arts students, it might be their first experience of learning about academic writing in a university. Next slide. Okay, so next slide, please, Lockie. Thank you. So let's talk about the context of the Faculty of Arts, who the courses are for. Oh, I think we might have jumped a slide. Sorry, can you go one slide back, please, Lockie? Hi, Lockie, can you hear me? Can you go one slide back, please? Is that possible? Thank you. Okay, so there are 4 schools in the Faculty of Arts. Oh, all right. Okay, it's jumping around a bit. I'll just talk about them. So there's the School of Chinese, the School of English, School of Humanities, and the School of Modern Languages and Cultures. So within these 4 schools, there's a huge diversity of disciplines, as you can see. And that means, of course, there's a huge diversity in knowledge creation, genre, methodologies, etc. Okay, next slide, please. I guess the signal has to go into space first and then come back down. There we go. Okay, so the original design of the course was by the previous program coordinator, Mr. Sam Cole, and he did it with consultation with the faculty. And the faculty were very concerned about reading and writing standards of the students, so they wanted to kind of elevate these. And they wanted a more focus, less on writing as product, because that's kind of what they've done very much in their DSE examination, and focus more on process writing and also what they call writing to learn. So it's very much informed by scholars like Hirvela in that regard. Now, when it came to designing the course, one of the great challenges, of course, is it's a huge diversity of text and genres for reading within the arts faculty. As you can see, in terms of primary sources, there can be literary text, there can be economic, historic, social texts. We can have audio, visual, video, dance, food, anything you can think of, right? And then, of course, when it comes to secondary sources, the scholarly sources, you get things like, obviously, journal articles, monographs, books, and book chapters. But within that, there's a huge diversity as well. I mean, think of maybe, like a journal article from a sort of hard linguistics journal where it's very mathematical, and compare that to maybe something from like fine arts where it's looking at, using things like phenomenology, to do its study. Now, when it comes to writing, again, huge diversity in terms of genres found within the humanities and the arts. I had when I was kind of preparing myself to become coordinator, I went out and sort of tried to find out what are all the genres, and I kind of tried to put them into these kind of 4 categories: discursive, expository, argumentative, and review. I should also add reflective writing is quite popular and quite common now as well. So you can see there's a huge diversity of range. Next slide. And then, of course, when it comes to just essays, I mean, if you're just looking at essays, a lot of scholars in genre have commented on the problem with genre of essays. Okay, so it's very, very loose genre. It's very hard to define what those textual features are. Obviously, genres change, and particularly within the arts faculty and within the humanities, students' work is prized for its creativity and originality. So that could be with use of unique or unusual, maybe rhetorical strategies or structuring. And then within the course, there's a great range of diversity between the professors, what they expect from their students. Okay, now Highland did obviously Highland did some research on this as well, comparing the sciences with the humanities. But again, I think these things are all in a climb. Like I say, the diversity of texts can move very much towards science, but very much back towards the humanities, depending on the discipline and depending on the specific course and the professor. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we did, the original course designer then, with these kind of problems in mind, we had to think about what kind of courses would we give our students. So it was, we sort of put them into six courses, which roughly align with the majors and the disciplines within the 4 different schools. So we have country and cultures, we have literary studies, we have philosophy, we have history, we have language studies, which would be things like linguistics, or maybe students who are doing language courses, and then we have the creative and visual arts. Okay. Now, when it came to designing the courses, next slide, we had to think of assessment tasks that were going to help with the course learning outcomes. So these are the course learning outcomes that were derived for the courses. As you can see, they kind of they're very much focused on reading and writing skills, critical, distinguishing between critical ideas and supporting ideas, understanding disciplinary arguments, looking at rhetorical features of texts and academic arguments, and then of course language. So putting all these together, we had to come up with, well, as I just said a bit earlier, we had to think of the assessment tasks and the key course components. So the key course components, which will feed into the skills, the transferable skills, which I'll talk about in a minute, are the bibliographic essay, which is kind of like a literature review, or sometimes would be referred to as a multi-sources review. It requires the students to come up with 3 to 5 academic sources on a very narrow topic, synthesize these critical ideas under different themes, and then they write it in it's process written, starting with a proposal, an outline, a partial draft, and then a full draft. And then there's the collaborative writing, where they learn about what we call elemental genres. So elemental genres are sort of parts of text, okay, key parts of essays that you might find, concept explanation, analysis of a primary source, a rebuttal, And the students work on these together. They discuss the texts collaboratively, and then they sort of submit this in a portfolio. And then finally, they have the reflection, the oral reflection, where they think about their academic English skills, how they're developing, and how they might apply these in their courses. Okay, so from all that, next slide, please. We put together, for this research project, we put together what are the kind of key skills we think that the course components and the assessments are teaching and practicing, and that students could transfer to their disciplinary majors. So these are the kind of nine sort of skills that we identified. So we have identify and develop the topic, find core literature. Core literature just means, you know, highly relevant scholarly sources, identify critical ideas and arguments, respond critically to ideas, synthesize the content, okay, write elemental genres, critically discuss ideas from texts, reflect and revise on their research, and then cite sources properly to avoid plagiarism. So I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Doki Law, who will talk about the methodology.
Thank you very much, Colin, and thank you very much, everybody. Sorry about the slices. It takes about 5 seconds before it shows up on the screen. I don't know why. I'm trying my best.
Okay, thanks, Lockie.
Just a reminder that you guys have 5 minutes left for the presentation.
No problem. I'll just skip through all these. Basically, we'll work on existing research gaps, including this one by Bernard and Sissi, talking about the lack of certain quantitative studies on transfer. So that's why we picked up on these. And that's because the project is also very targeted and structured. This will actually help us to actually look into every single skill and to do an e-survey, conduct an e-survey with the students, and so that to get their perceptions about, you know, what they think they have transferred and learned. Right. And for the data, we have actually conducted e-surveys for all 6 courses in semester 1 and semester 2. The total number of observations we have gathered is 449 and about 62% of response rates. We also did focus groups with 5 students, a total of 250 minutes of transcriptions. For the quantitative data, we applied partial least squares structural equation modeling, and for the focus group, obviously, we transcribed it, and then later on, Colin will give you some of the findings. Right, I'll focus on the quanti. So basically, what we try to do is we break we actually group these questions into 4 constructs, where including the understanding learning, the transfer applicability, the content relevance, and the transfer outcome. Right, so we have 4 interesting bubbles. Basically, those bubbles represent different constructs, okay, content relevance, and in green, showing that it's a key latent variable because it has very strong path coefficients pointing to the others. And then, so from here, we can see that the green, in terms of content, the relevance of content to students really strongly affect their understanding learning, which then strongly affect their transfer and applicability, so on and so forth. So you can look at the thickness of the lines to get a rough idea of how these items or these constructs affect their learning. So basically, we've got some of the outskirts, so just to show you how substantial they are in terms of predicting the values of transfer outcome, right? Which is very high because R-squared, at best, you can only get 1. Right, so I'm going to pass the time back to Colin, who will discuss with you or share with you the findings and discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Lockie. Okay, so start with the quantitative results first. Okay, that might be 1 slide back, Lockie. Okay, all right. I'll just talk about what we found with the quantitative data anyway. So basically, the means for the constructs of understanding of learning and transfer applicability were quite high. And you can see, if you look at the screen, you can see that it goes UL 1 to 9 and TA 1 to 9. And those refer to the skills that I showed you earlier. So you can see that you know, on a 1 to 5 Likert scale, okay, we're kind of moving towards the kind of agree side of things with for UL and for TA, somewhere between 3.6 and 3.9, and the median being sort of 4. Okay, now it's a bit lower when we talk about content relevance and transfer outcome, and I'll talk a little bit about that when we look at the qualitative data. So we could move on to the next slide. Okay, so if we look at the slide, I just want to make a quick point about the, if you just go up, Lockie. That's fine. Okay, so the qualitative data that came from the survey comments, but it also came from transcripts of the interviews. Oops, I think we've gone back again. Lockie, can you go back to the previous slide you had? Okay. Yeah, the one just under findings and discussion. Thank you. Okay, so for this one, when the students were talking or writing about writing about the skills, they tended to sort of, put them together or add other skills that they'd learned, or maybe not talk about them in a direct way. So we had to kind of maybe infer. But I'm just going to summarize under the course components, because this is how the students tended to talk about it. So for the bibliographic essay, they felt it was similar to maybe literature reviews that they do for their final year projects. And some students even said that they did bibliographic essays. But they also felt it helped expand their knowledge of academic genres, which is a good thing. And it helped them, they liked the process approach to writing. Now, when it comes to specific skills, what they felt that the bibliographic essay practice was the skills of finding academic sources, refining an essay topic, critical reading, synthesizing sources. But there was another one they mentioned that we didn't pick up on in the quantitative data, which was that they said it helped them express their own stance and the stance of others, which is good. Okay, next slide. Okay, for the collaborative writing, again, we can see these skills that we were looking for. So the sharing of perspectives and the raising awareness of these elemental genres, these kind of structuring parts of essays. As well as that, they also mentioned that they help them with other skills that we hadn't necessarily looked at in the survey, which is things like structuring texts, note-taking, summarizing and paraphrasing, and actually improving the clarity of the writing. And they felt that all these skills, as well as the ones that we showed you earlier, were very useful for them. Some of the quotes here kind of I've highlighted in bold some of the skills that I was talking about, you know, so designing my topic, okay, drafting, summarizing, responding to texts, concept explanation, causal relationship. These are referring to the elemental genres, synthesizing content, etc. Okay, next slide. Some more positive quotes. Okay, so sorry, next slide, Lockie. Thanks. Okay, so more about you know, identifying and finding relevant sources. Okay, incorporating academic text into writing, reflecting and revising their research skills, and writing precisely and concisely. So other skills outside the skills that we looked at. And there were negative comments. Okay, these are sort of reflected as well in some of the student evaluation we get, but basically the feeling that some of them said we don't write essays, or we don't necessarily read academic texts. Now remember, some of these students are second year students, possibly when they go into third and fourth year, when they start doing their projects and capstone projects, they may change their minds on this. Okay, so I think some students maybe haven't gone into the sort of more research side in their undergraduate. Okay, next slide.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm afraid the time is up, but perhaps you might want to just show us your final slide.
Okay, okay. So just the conclusion there would be, I think looking forward, we'd want to do maybe a bit more research, maybe ask students to identify what they think is easy and difficult to transfer the skills that we looked at. Maybe not look at near and far as polls, but maybe think of them as a cline, depending on the course maybe, or on the professor that they're in the class that they're in. I think going forward, teaching students some of these skills, like hugging, what Jonathan Green refers to hugging and bridging skills, i.e. reflecting on what they're learning and how they could apply it, maybe bringing in texts that they're working on in their course, and looking at how the skills that they're learning in the class could be applied to the writing that they're currently doing. I think more generally for teachers who are maybe not necessarily even teaching arts and humanities. Again, just thinking about how you could maybe teach and get students to reflect on transfer. There's a nice quote there in the final slide, I think, from Hirvela, just about the idea that we shouldn't really necessarily expect students to be able to transfer what they learn. Okay, so I'm sorry about the lag there with the slides. That might have been a little bit confusing in places, but if you'd like us to go back to any slides, do feel free to ask Lockie and see if he can get that. Okay, thanks. So any questions, anyone? There's a lot there, I'm afraid. Anyone out there teaching students from the arts and humanities would like to say anything, or does anyone like to ask about transfer in general?
I'd like to ask if it's okay.
Of course, yeah.
So out of the different skills that you mentioned that could be learned and transferred, which ones do you think the students will appreciate and value the most, and why?
It depends on the student. I would say that probably the most common one is the discussion about reading skills. I think students are aware, or well, by the end of the course, they're aware that reading is more than simply extracting, data, or what we, or cherry picking, right? So a lot of students realize that what they've been doing really when they're writing essays is cherry picking to support an argument, rather than reading a source in depth and really fully understanding the arguments that the scholar is making. So that's probably one of the things looking at this project in particular, but also just general sort of feedback from students. I think there's a question in the chat there as well. Does your course have intended learning outcomes? I'm wondering how the aims of the course are defined. Okay, well, the course, I'm not quite sure what you mean by intended learning outcomes. I mean, we have course learning outcomes that are quite generally written for all the courses, which were agreed upon with the faculty. And like I say, we're not getting down to really specific, micro sort of outcomes, like, the student will have, learned how to cite using, MLA. The student will have, so they're more generally written because that's the way they were formulated prior to me taking over as the coordinator. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I think it does. I just, when you listed the skills that were transferred, it seems very concrete and something that students can relate to, almost, using it very explicitly. They seem more useful than the more, abstract learning outcomes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I take the point. Yeah. Like I say, these are the way that they were originally. It's quite an involved process writing these kind of course learning outcomes, because the faculty has to approve them, and that would to do like a major revision like that would require me to kind of go back and speak to the faculty. But I think they're broadly defined to allow us to add and change the kind of micro outcomes as needed, right? Because when the course was originally designed, it wasn't, people weren't quite sure, what was going to work, what wasn't going to work, and how the courses would evolve. Maybe in the future, that would be an idea. I mean, thank you for the suggestion. I think that might be something to think about. And I think it might, like you say, help students understand what how they're, because I think sometimes when they see these course learning outcomes, they feel that they're not quite, we have to explain how they've learned them, as it were. It's like a 2 steps to understand how they reach the kind of course learning outcomes. Okay. Thanks for your question.
I think that's the time for the section just now. Thank you very much, 3 presenters, for sharing with us your finding.